Hello there, and welcome to another Autism Sparks podcast, brought to you on behalf of Autism Dogs. I'm Charlotte Smeet, and joining me today, Gail and Jenny. Thank you both for joining. Today's podcast is called Help, My Child Only Eats Pasta. Sensory issues in autism go hand in hand, and one of the biggest areas we can see this is in relation to food. According to a 2019 study, 70.4% of autistic children have atypical eating behaviours, compared to 4.8% of neurotypical children. For 92% of autistic children, the most commonly preferred foods were grains and chicken, mainly nuggets. Autistic individuals may be very selective about what they will eat and may be sensitive to texture, smells, looks, or sounds of certain foods. As well as this, there may well be routines and rituals around food, anxiety around changes in food, as well as difficulties around responding to internal body states, such as hunger. My son Noah, when I began this podcast, requested that I don't chat about him while recording. However, when I told him the title of this podcast, he gave me special permission to share a little bit about him. So Noah, if you are listening, thank you very much for letting me share a little bit about you. The reason Noah let me share a little bit about him tonight is because this title fits Noah to an absolute T. Almost every night, Noah will eat pasta, sometimes with a little bit of cheese, always with salt and pepper. It has been his staple for as long as I can remember. To him, you absolutely cannot beat a bowl full of plain pasta. He has a favourite pasta, Bose, and his least favourite, macaroni. Noah also has an amazing ability to differentiate the differences in food. For example, I was coming back from a hospital appointment with my eldest daughter, and we decided to stop into McDonald's, and I bought Noah some chips. I took them home, and he tried them, and he said they tasted funny. It took me a minute, but I remembered that at the drive-thru they had a sign saying they had changed the oil they had cooked the food with, and that was enough for Noah to feel put off by the food. Both of my daughters also struggle with food, but in different ways. All three of my children go through intense periods of only liking one type of food, whether that is a breakfast cereal, nuggets, or bagels. They will eat that and only that for long periods, and then completely stop one day, and it can't go anywhere near them. I have to be careful what I stockpile, or I end up with loads of pot noodles, onion rings, or hash browns that nobody wants to eat anymore. At the moment, I have one meal that everyone will eat, and so I've become a master at differentiating one meal to meet everyone's requirements, though it is also very common for me to make 3 different meals in our house. However, the struggle with food is not simply in relation to eating. There are struggles around crockery not being right. We have had to buy separate plates and bowls so that they are not too scratchy. My eldest Elodie sometimes removes my cutlery if I make too much noise with it as I'm eating. We once considered buying plastic knives and forks so that we could reduce the noise for the kids. As with most of our parenting, my husband and I have followed a fairly low demand route, so we work with whatever the kids feel able to eat. I place no rules around food, as I'm keen for them to have a healthy and positive relationship with food. And I make sure that I have loads of nutritious and varied food in the house, so that they can try it should they want to. I used to feel embarrassed about it, or wonder if I should have put more boundaries in place. But as my children have grown, I've been glad we took the path we have. In every area of their lives, I'm keen for the children to feel comfortable in their own skin. We are very much a you do you parents. So if they love pasta, well then they love pasta. And if they eat it every day for the rest of their lives, then I'll be right there, boiling the pasta and salting the water with them. So, as I said earlier, we have Gail and Jenny joining the podcast tonight. Gail is mum to Team Blue, or in other words, her son Dylan and his assistant's dog Blue. She is also married to Steve, one of the ambassadors for Autism Dogs. She has 2 more children with Steve and is mum to 2 stepchildren. Most of the family are neurodivergent, including herself, though only Dylan has a diagnosis in place. Gail is a busy working mum and works as a teaching assistant in a primary school. In her spare time, she loves spending time in the garden, walking their little dog Rosie in the countryside around where they live, and reading crime novels. Her family is incredibly important to her, and it was only after receiving some training on autism in her TA role at school that she realised that her own son could well be autistic too. He was 17 when he was diagnosed and coping with school without any additional support. Like any parent, Gail always wants the best for her children and recognises that this never stops no matter how old they are. When Dylan was in year 13 and about to sit his A-levels, she realised that he would not be able to cope with going to university and living far away from home unless he had some support. This was when the family turned to Autism Dogs for help and applied for an assistance dog in 2020. Since then, Dylan has graduated from university and grown in confidence, all thanks to having Blue by his side and the incredible love and support from the wonderful team at the farm. Gail is now more confident that Dylan will be able to have a career and live independently one day when he finds the perfect job that matches his special interests. Jenny is mum to two neurodivergent adult kids, 26 and 29. Both have had late diagnosis, with the youngest being diagnosed at 18 years. They have an assistance dog called Mike from Autism Dogs, who has really settled in well. It was quite hard early on, but now Mike makes such a difference. Mike is a sensitive and loving dog, and Jenny is supported with the public access training, as Mike's handler can get very fatigued. However, the love and the trust that Mike and his handler have for each other is mutual, and they are absolutely inseparable. Jenny is a retired disability nurse who has been celebrating a big birthday this year with lots of parties. So happy birthday for this year, Jenny. She is a National Trust volunteer and does Georgian costumed meet and greets. It's great fun and she has a laugh, and it helps her to take her mind off being a carer and worrying. I'm actually, when I was writing this out tonight, Jenny, I was actually quite envious about this. I think that sounds so cool. Jenny has discovered she can sing and is in a carer's choir, and has realised that singing has amazing health benefits with breath and brain work, but is also fun. She helps to run a local carers craft group and is on a carers panel. And I just thought when I was writing this out, I thought it was so amazing. I suppose the stuff that you do but recognise as well that you need it as a carer, because I think that sometimes we can get a bit lost in our roles, can't we? And kind of forget who we are. And I'd kind of said, let me know your hobbies and la la la. And I was thinking, I don't have any hobbies actually. So, I should probably get some of them. I don't think there's anywhere though I can go locally that I could do Georgian costumed meet and greets. I'd love to do that. That would be so good. Anyway, Jenny, could I come to you first? Can you share a little bit about your journey in terms of parenting a child with a restrictive diet?
The early days were difficult, but we didn't have any diagnoses, so we didn't really know. I think being a learning disability nurse as well, and having two very actually capable children, it never occurred to me at all that my kids were neurodivergent, and I think it just skipped past us. And the eating was quite a big issue, and I must say I was not nearly as patient as you said. It sounds like you have been, Charlotte. It sounds like you know it's commendable that you have been more than happy for your child to just eat pasta. I think in the early days we did have a lot of battles, and I do regret that now. We have become much more patient and much more understanding now, because we didn't know what was going on in the beginning, and all of the things that you have suggested, yes, we experienced, and cutlery and noise and light and sound, the lights on in the kitchen, and it's a shame, really. It really is a shame, because I think we probably made things more difficult because we didn't understand and we didn't know. As we developed more understanding, I think opportunities have changed, and diet has actually gradually improved, I think, because we took it slower. But I do remember reading in the early days an article about gradually introducing new foods because the only vegetable that my child would eat when they were younger was peas, which is brilliant, I suppose, really, if there are children that ate none. But I wasn't happy with this. I wanted there to be more than just peas. So I read up that you can gradually introduce a tiny morsel. So we did. And after about a year, broccoli was being eaten, and broccoli is still eaten. So the only vegetables are broccoli, carrots, and peas, which isn't actually that bad. It's actually pretty good. But yeah, we did have a lack of understanding, and I think over years we understand now, and we're talking. My child is now 26, so we're talking 20 years ago, and I think there's a lot more understanding now.
Yeah, I'd completely agree. But I also want to make sure that I do not come across as if I have a lot of guilt of the early years before diagnosis. Maybe not so much around food, but around clothing. I have, in fact, I'm sure I've even mentioned this in another podcast. I have a really strong recollection. We were going to the hospital, and the hospital wanted my middle daughter Molly to be wearing, I don't know, certain clothes for testing her joints. And she was sitting on the stairs sobbing, and I was like, Molly, you must wear these. I've been told you must wear these, because I didn't understand why she couldn't just pop these clothes on and head to the hospital. And it's there in my head, the guilt when you don't understand, it's actually quite strong, isn't it? And it's I think we have to be careful not to be too hard on ourselves, because we're doing it for the best reasons, and I think once you learn, okay, well, I was in a sensory workshop, and they were talking about clothes, and they said, you need to understand that if your child is struggling with clothes, to them, it's as if you are being asked to put on something that's made of barbed wire. That's the same. For their sensory system, that's what they're feeling right at that moment. And I was like, oh my goodness, that is so clear to me now. And you change your ways. But, unless you're educated on that, you just don't realize, you know what I mean? And unless you struggle yourself with sensory processing, it's not something that comes naturally to you. So yeah, I need to definitely disabuse you from thinking that in any way there's a whole load of mum guilt that I carry around with me every day. But yeah, I think I totally understand what you're saying, especially about the 3 vegetables. It's like, if you find your 3 things, you just stock the fridge with them, don't you? But I think 3 is amazing. I think that's pretty decent. What about you, Gail? How's your experience been?
Well, I think we didn't know either that 2 out of 3 of our children were neurodivergent. My middle son, we found out he was diagnosed at 17. My daughter, we're still on the waiting list, waiting. So my 2 stepdaughters, when they were little, were always pretty good eaters, although we now know that certainly one of those is autistic, and possibly the other one is maybe ADHD, not sure. And so they were really good eaters. My first son was a great eater, no problems. And then the second child came along, not so bad as a baby, but more as he got a little bit older, that we realised there were certain things that he wasn't eating. And then my third child, my daughter, she was actually lactose intolerant and egg intolerant when she was a baby, so she already had a restricted diet. But we were sort of just given the advice, well, when they were babies, just to try things, introduce things a little bit at a time. And we sort of took it from there. And it was only as they got a little bit older, particularly my son, it was more the things that he was leaving on his plate that you're like, okay, well, he is actually quite a fussy eater then. So as parents, we just started adapting meals. He would love pasta. Pasta was a key thing in his diet for a long time. but he wouldn't eat anything. So if I'd cooked the sauce with bits of onion in, he would always leave the bits of onion. If I'd used chopped tomatoes, he would leave the bits of tomatoes. So I just adapted and took out the onion and changed the chopped tomatoes for passata, which was very smooth. I start hiding vegetables into the bolognese sauce. And to be honest, I didn't understand why I was doing it. I just adapted to getting to eat things. And the same with my daughter. And I think because we've realised as adults now from going through this with the children and realising they're autistic, that I've realised actually I'm the same. I'm not diagnosed, but I'm also almost certainly autistic, and I have a lot of sensory issues. I just didn't know why. And my husband too. But my husband, when he was a child, he was always, his mum and dad were very, very strict over, they still had that wartime mentality that you couldn't waste anything. So he was made to eat all his meals. And if he left anything, it was reheated and given it back to him for the next meal until he ate everything. So having had that experience himself, he never wanted to put his own children through that. So, we were always, I didn't know what it was called at the time, but we were always very low demand parenting with our kids. We never made them eat things. We always used to try stuff with them and see what they would eat. And, often it would mean that, particularly lunches and breakfast, everyone would eat something different. But I never really worried too much because that's how we were, that's just how our family was. And I think that's a bit like what my family was growing up. We always had to eat the same tea, but lunchtimes and breakfast were always very, freely available, whatever you wanted, you ate. We just didn't realise what we were doing or why we were doing it until, they were teenagers and learned about autism. So it's always sort of worked for us, but it was, like you said, you'd find something that they would eat and they would eat it for years. And then all of a sudden, I don't want to eat that anymore.
Yeah.
Right, okay. Luckily, my husband's not too fussy, so he always ended up eating stockpiles of sausage rolls and goodness knows what. They'd stopped eating. But yeah, you do find you have to adapt, don't you? And it doesn't get any easier the older they get. No, you just adapt, don't you, and start tweaking meals and maybe cook 2 or 3. But I think if you've always done it, you just don't really worry about it. I've never really got worried or stressed, or it's just what we do as a family. Yeah.
I think when you get a diagnosis, everything kind of clicks into place and you're like, okay, well, that is why only one pair of tights worked for you.
Yes.
Up till that point, you don't kind of question it. You're just like, okay, well, no, it has to be tights from the specific shop. You just kind of are like, no, this is just what works. I can remember my eldest, even as a baby, she started off on the period foods and it was all great. And literally she just stopped eating. She just stopped eating completely. And I was like, I don't know what to do here. She was my first child. I was quite young. I had LD when I was 22. I didn't have any other kind of contemporaries around me to be like, I don't know what to do right now at that point. So I remember I was coming home, we'd been on a trip and LD was, she was starving. She was screaming her head off. She wouldn't accept any period food. And this mum spoke to me and she's like, have you heard of baby-led weaning? Where you just like give them food and they can choose themselves and they can put it into their mouths. And I was like, I've never heard of this concept before. Aldi loved it because she had control over it and she could choose what was going in her mouth. I ended up doing it for all 3 of my kids, but I always think, I'm so glad that mum on the train just had a wee chat with me, because I had no idea what to do with a child who didn't like period foods. You just expect, every child has period foods. And I look back and I think, okay, well, actually, the texture could have been wrong and something could have been not right for her that was just setting her off at that point. I don't think it's till you chart back after diagnosing you go, actually, gosh, that makes so much sense. I just thought that was normal. I thought that was what we needed to do to kind of get by. So I think you're absolutely right. I also think it was really interesting what you were saying about, you know, the upbringing that your husband had. He kind of was like, actually, I'm going to make a choice that's definitely not what we will do, because I suppose it can go either way when you're brought up like in an extreme of one way or the other. You can sometimes be like, no, this is the way we do it. So I think really interesting, your husband was like, obviously that was quite tricky for him to have reheated food given back to him.
It didn't spoil his relationship with his parents, but it did affect him going forward and him making decisions for his own children. So yeah, very tricky.
Absolutely. And I think as a parent, you do have to accept that you've been molded for bad or for good through your own upbringing. I think my husband's definitely struggled with food waste, because I do find, I don't know if you would agree, but there is an element of food waste. So say I've made a new dish that one of the kids had tried and it's like an absolute no-go, or today we got some noodles for the kids, and you know, one of them thought they would absolutely love it, and they were like, no, this is not for me at all. And I mean, we're all full. So no, we've definitely, and it's actually more when we go out and about, I've had to learn to just be like, do you know what, it's great that we're going out together as a family and the kids are just trying something new, so that's also great, and I have to be okay if that's not touched. Because it was the experience. Because I think that's probably one of the things my husband has struggled with the most, is, you know, being comfortable with food waste. I don't know if you both find that there's an element of food waste in your house, but there definitely is in ours.
Yeah, there's definitely food waste, and I think it's just something I can identify Gail completely with, because with what you said about your husband's parents, because I think both of my husband and myself were brought up like that. You know, where we are a little bit older, and you know, that was just a generational thing. You sat and you ate what was put in front of you, and you know, the post-war parents. Food waste, yes, it happens, and it's too bad. So sometimes you can reheat things or do something else with them, but yeah, there is food waste, and you just have to I think it takes time to learn how to chill over that. And you know, if you can put it in the compost, it's not quite so bad as it going in the bin. But yeah, there is food waste, and if we don't chop the onions in the right shape, we can put onions into things now, but they have to be practically invisible, or they are picked out one by one little onion at a time, and put at the side of the plate, or else it's not eaten at all. So yeah, there's food waste, and that's just how it is. We can cook quite a few meals now, but they have to be quite plain and cooked in a certain way. And so we'll, you know, sometimes what we had recently was an Indonesian fried rice dish called nasi goreng. But the actual recipe comes with prawns, but we'll cook the prawns separately and just sprinkle them on top. So the fried rice dish is just fried rice, so that's perfectly okay. But we'll do other bits and pieces separately and just put them on top. So yeah, you just learn to adapt.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. It's interesting what you were saying as well, Charlotte, about going out and eating at restaurants. When ours were younger, we used to go to a lot of these buffet style restaurants where they could pick and choose and try things, and it didn't matter. Mm-hmm. If they tried something and didn't like it, they could just leave it and go back and get something else. But we also found very quickly as well that if we were going to go out to a restaurant as a family, we always used to check the online menu first and sit down with them, and we'd go through it and see if there was something that they would eat. So they were prepared, they knew what they were going to choose. Or if they went through the whole menu and said, no, there's nothing I want to eat there, then we'd forget that one and move on to another one. You know? But again, we didn't really understand why we were doing that until we got the diagnosis with Dylan, and then it all sort of clicked into place. And we were like, actually, you know, we did pretty well as parents bringing them up. We just didn't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the buffet idea is such a great idea, because they can just pick and choose and leave anything that they're not so keen on. My three all have a favourite restaurant that my eldest they even know what she will order, because it's like a favourite. But we do still try to, push them out of their comfort zone, be prepared that actually that might not always work. So for my 40th, we went to somewhere completely new, and all three of them ordered stuff that they loved. It was like, wow. And it actually really enhanced the whole experience because they were really enjoying their food, and it was just really nice. We also have done orders that, I mean, Mark and I are eating for 5 because it was just like, none of this is what the kids are wanting. And they were excited at ordering it because it sounded good to them. But just didn't, when it came, they were like, no, this is not for me. But I still think, well, we've still been out. We've still been out, the 5 of us. We've still enjoyed this experience of being the 5 of us, which is rare for us kids who like to be in a bedroom with the door closed and the light off. So you've got to enjoy the moments, even if the food wasn't quite what they were expecting, I suppose. I think you've both kind of been chatting a little bit about this. But Jenny, how do you feel? I mean, it definitely sounds like your parenting of food has changed as your kids have got older. So like, how would you explain that transition?
I mean, I think it happened before we knew that there was, probably actually when I suspected. The actual diagnosis, sadly, took 2 years here in Scotland, in East Lothian, and so during that time when we were considering that there probably is, and we were pushing for the autism diagnosis, I probably suddenly started to get more patient then, and suddenly realised, oh, this is what it is, and just understood. So from then on, I mean, I don't think we were being horrible actually beforehand, like our own parents probably were, but we were probably a little bit less exasperated, or I'm not quite sure, but just maybe just a bit more relaxed and less worrying. And my daughter did have an episode of where she had significant problems with IBS, but it wasn't really diagnosed, and I knew it was probably dietary and anxiety. So I didn't want to put her through tests for diagnosing it properly, but I sort of knew it probably was. And so just trying to encourage a more healthy diet to help, and maybe just trying to explain and trying to sit down and say, look, if we all just continue to eat white flour all the time and not have fruit juices and maybe not have an apple, it's detrimental, and just trying to explain, because there is an instance of bowel cancer in our family as well, and that's not something that you want your children to have to deal with in the future. But actually then getting the dog has made a huge difference as well, because I don't know whether we're just all more relaxed or my child is more relaxed. And also I read an article, and I told Andrew about it, that there was in a science magazine, there was an article about having a dog and having good gut health. And they were linking that, you're sharing, it sounds absolutely disgusting for anybody who doesn't have a dog and who isn't into dogs and isn't into animals at all. It sounds disgusting. Sharing your gut bacteria with your dog is actually very healthy for you and humans. Allowing the dog to lick your face, you're getting bacteria, and it works both ways. And it was a fully researched article that was in a scientific journal, that having a dog is supposed to be very good for IBS and gut health. And I read this about 8 or 9 months after we had the dog, and I thought, gosh, I think that the IBS issues had actually already gone. So it did make an enormous difference as well, just whether or not she was just eating better because she was feeling more comfortable, and maybe suddenly taking on board the things that I'd been saying over the years before about trying to have more fibre and eating brown bread and eating apples, etc. So things have improved very much over the years. And I think you're not really going to reason with a small child about you needing fibre and why you're needing fibre. But perhaps as they get older, they will develop more of an understanding. And when they're at school, they're doing biology, etc. They're learning more, they're doing science. But I think with younger kids, you're just fighting a losing battle and maybe accepting that they're just going to eat pasta. But hopefully as they get older, and that's certainly happened with my child, as they've got older, they've developed a better understanding of what is a good idea, and have experienced having, nasty cramps and pain and what goes along with that. So I think that's changed gradually, and having the dog has actually had a huge impact in that way as well.
I did not know any of that about the gut health, so I feel I'm going to be honest, I feel a bit grossed out, but also quite intrigued about this. And Molly definitely lets Milo lick her face. I'm afraid I have a no lick the face policy with the dog, but maybe I need to rethink this, maybe that is not good. I think you're so right, and actually it's really interesting what you're saying, because both Aldi and Molly have Crohn's disease, and I think that it is really tricky, because you want to chat to them about, well, actually, to be honest, most of my chats with my eldest aren't so much about food and how she can get more fibre. They're more to do with sleep hygiene when you're not well, because she is an 18-year-old who loves to game at 3 a.m. But it's that way when there's an added complication of health issues, and you want, but there's also really strong sensory aversions too. And I suppose that goes back to the hospital. We're expecting Molly to be wearing certain clothes to come in to get all her joints checked, and she, for sensory reasons, was unable to do it. And I felt like the middleman, and I had to make her do it. And now, actually, I would take a very different stance, and I would say, no, I'm sorry, that's actually a no for Molly, that can't happen. But I didn't have the confidence then. I didn't have the understanding then to feel like I could say that. I also felt a bit intimidated. Well, somebody's told me to do this, I must do it. So I think that as you get more understanding, but I think also as you get more confidence in yourself as a parent, you can then kind of be like, well, no, that's not possible, it's an aversion, but also have those conversations with your child about why things are good. And both my girls have had to have NG tubes in to have a liquid diet, and both of them have had to have special diets around about scopes time and all these kind of things, and they're amazing. I mean, they're incredibly resilient with all these things, but it is really difficult when you're already trying to battle. Because I actually sometimes think, I don't know if you would agree, but sometimes I feel really sorry for my kids, because I actually think they'd really love to enjoy a whole range of other, like they don't want to have, they don't want to struggle with this. It's in no way a choice. It's in no way something that they are any way able to control. And I think that's so difficult to, when you want to be able to eat anything, but actually it's just a no. I think the sensory processing difficulties, they can feel a bit like a prison, because it's like you almost feel trapped. Well, I can see something really good over there, but actually it's a no for me. And I don't know if you've had any experience with this, but sometimes with my kids, if something puts them off a food, so it could be anything, even like a smell, or someone talking about something they don't like while they're eating, it's like, no, you have to take that away from me now. That's it. It's done. I cannot eat that anymore. Really difficult to manage. But I think you're absolutely right. When there's health complications as well, and you're trying to have those conversations, it just adds quite an extra layer onto it, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I also found, certainly with my daughter, that it depended on what other sensory things were going on. That it might be something that normally she would like eating, but if there were other things going on, then it just wouldn't taste right. And sometimes it would be, as well, especially with my daughter, she just wouldn't know what she wanted to eat. Lunchtimes in particular, particularly in the holidays away from school, because it was out of the school routine and at home and different. And we'd go through everything in the fridge, and everything would be no, not have that, not have. And in the end, it might just be that she had chips for her lunch. But even now, she is better at eating. I think as she's got older, and I've adapted, and as she's got a better understanding, I've been trying to encourage her to eat, especially now she's at uni, to add a few more vegetables in there, because she's not too bad with vegetables. But then even then, she rang me the other day having a meltdown at 5 o'clock at night because she'd been late getting to a lecture and she wouldn't go in. So, and it all stemmed back to lunchtime, where she'd made herself a chicken salad sandwich, and for whatever reason she's made it, I don't know how many times, but on that day it didn't taste right. So she'd not enjoyed her lunch, and then that had impacted the rest of her day, resulting, by the time it got to 5 o'clock, she was late for a lecture and she sat outside and cried. I think that's why I never insisted that they eat things, because I think I sort of, without knowing, realised as they got older that it impacted the rest of their day and the day that I would have with them when they were children. So I think that's perhaps one of the ways unknowingly I adapted, and now I understand it and understand what affects her. I can say to her now, well, don't worry about it. It's fine. You don't have to eat chicken sandwiches. And I'll sit and go through all the other options that she could have for her lunch. And we came up with a bit of a game plan now. So since then, since last week, she's been fine. But at least now I understand why there are certain things that she can't eat. And I also understand as well that's also impacted by anything else that's gone on around her during the day, and what else has caused maybe that overstimulation that then impacts how they eat. So yeah, it's good to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're so right. It is more complex than just being like, you didn't make your lecture. Well, it's actually a whole bubbling pot that's been going on, and then this was the last straw that was like, no, it just couldn't cope with it. I think and sometimes you don't even realize what the starting point was. You know, it could be just that the jumper you're wearing didn't feel quite right, and it's not felt quite right all day, and it's just bubbled away all day. But yeah, absolutely right. And actually, you've just, you know, when you just said about how you would go through the list of what was for lunch and it would just be no, no, no. So my middle daughter can be like that. And sometimes I think I'm making this harder because I'm giving you so much choice. I need to give you only 3 things. But my heart sings. I find it really difficult when they get out of one of their intense phases. When they're in an intense phase, we're good to go. You know, I know the system. I'm on it. But as soon as they're like, I can't eat that anymore, it's like, okay, right. We're back to like listing through what could you possibly eat. Okay, well, there's the mini pizzas you used to like. No, okay, that's fine. You used to like hash browns and onions. No, okay, fine. Bagel and cream cheese. No, okay. And your heart's sinking lower and lower as you're like, okay. Working out what the co-op might have that you can run up and get. Tortellini? No, okay, fine. So yes, it's I know that feeling. Gail, have you found that your children have they changed how they've interacted with food over time? You know, because it sounds like you and your husband have always followed a fairly. I love the phrase low demand parenting, because it sounds good, doesn't it? Rather than just being like, well, I just kind of did whatever the kids like. I let the kids get away with stuff. Low demand parenting, but you know, it sounds like you kind of always followed that route of kind of working with the kids where they were at. But have you noticed that as your kids have got older, that they've kind of changed how they've interacted with food?
I think they understand now what they like and don't like, and they understand now, and they can articulate why. So I never knew up until a few years ago that there's certain vegetables that my son won't eat because they're crunchy, and he doesn't like crunchy vegetables.
Or they squeak. Do you have squeaky vegetables?
Yeah, and
green beans are very squeaky. They're a no-no.
Oh, absolutely. My son is very much like you were saying about your child. He will eat broccoli, carrots and peas. And that is about it, mostly. And he knows that. So those things that he develops, the taste he developed as a child, what he disliked as a child, he won't eat now as an adult. I know he will never eat sweet potato ever. But he is a bit more willing to try things. And especially if we go away on holiday to hotels, and if there is a buffet style, he will try different things. He is quite good. So he's a little bit more open-minded. And I think my daughter is as well. It's helped actually for her that she can now take lactase tablets, which means she can eat more dairy products. So that's helped. But yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? It is tricky. They are still very much will eat. They find one thing they like and they will eat it every single day. That's not really changed. And we're still at a point where I'll have bought everything in for the week and I'll suddenly notice there's a lot more of one thing in the fridge that is not being eaten. And I'll say to them, if you stopped eating such and such, you're like, yeah, don't like that anymore. I was like, all right, okay. So yeah, that's not changed. So there's little changes, but yeah, you get used to it, don't you? I'm used to it now, so it's just get on with it.
Do you ever get told that a factory has changed its recipe?
No, I've not really noticed that, to be honest. Maybe it's just happened and we've just not realised, and maybe that's why they've gone off things. I just never really thought about that, to be honest.
Well, my eldest had a absolute fixation with strawberry water, and then they decided to make it strawberry water with no added sugar, and it was right around exam time as well, so she was just like, how could they do this? How could they do this? And my husband and I would go out and try and stockpile the stuff that hadn't changed, because some shops still stocked it, to get rid of it. So I'd be like, right, we must get it. Anyway, she's now completely off strawberry water. She won't touch it with a barge pole. But anyway, there you go. It got her through exams. But actually, Gail, I was just going to ask you, because I remember, I started off at Glasgow Uni, and I remember I was in a very, very old halls, and the kitchen was disgusting, like absolutely disgusting. I remember it putting me off cooking any food and preparing any food. Like the food all tasted different as well, because it was cooked with different pans than, I would have used at home, or mum would have used at home. Like, have you found that your son and daughter going off to uni, there's been a wee bit of a change there because where they're preparing their food's different, or have they managed to cope with that okay?
I think they are mostly coping. Well, my daughter is coping very well, actually. We made sure we stocked her up with all the foods that she could eat. And she took everything with her. I made sure that she had plates and cutlery from home that she's used before. Same type of stainless steel pans and things. So she's not doing too bad. My son, on the other hand, didn't really cook very much for himself. I think he lived on pot noodles mostly, and frozen fish that he could heat up in the oven, and wraps and things. But for him, it wasn't so much preparing food, because he's getting a lot better at that now, and he's been quite independent over certainly preparing his lunches over the last 5 years. It was more a case of he wouldn't go into the kitchen because he didn't want to interact with the other people he was sharing with. His issue's always been communication. So he would always be worried that one of the other students would come in and start talking to him and he wouldn't know what to say back. So he always made sure that the kitchen was empty before he ever went in there. So, but he got through. He coped. He lived on pot noodles mostly. It was only for a few years. And he used to come home every week, so he'd have proper meals at home.
Listen, I'm sure that most of the student population live off pot noodles. Jenny, what about you? Do you find that as your kids have got older, their relationship with food has changed a bit?
The older child has never had any issues. The older child was late diagnosed with ADHD, and he's always been hungry and loves food, and he's skinny as a rake, and he just eats and eats and eats. So there's never been any issue. We are all living at home again. So there's four adults living in the house. So the eldest is very adventurous with his food and loves to cook sort of, what the younger people eat. So he likes all that, quite modern, and I love it too. So the problem has been trying to find something that we will all eat, and we do usually all try to have an evening meal together. Breakfast and lunch, just the same as Gail, are free for all. Get whatever you want. The house has got lots of things in it that they will all eat. It's just maybe easier to handle. I think that's all it is. We gradually try to introduce a few things. Like we can go away on holidays and she will cook a pot of chili con carne, which is something that we've done over the last couple of years. We assumed that she would go to uni and move out, but that's not happened. She's 26 and still living at home and spends most of the time gaming and walking the dog. So, but we've worked over years to try and get her to cook a little bit more. So she'll cook a spaghetti bolognese and puree the onions and not use a tin of tomatoes, because the tin of tomatoes aren't, is the passata, as Gail was saying. So she's adapted and we've adapted. The diet is still really quite narrow, but it's not hugely narrow. It's still quite healthy. I would say the relationship has adapted and we've all just accepted. And she has the same breakfast and has had the same breakfast every single morning for the last 10 years, which is 2 Weetabix, which is very good. And that's the fibre. And the same sprinkle of sugar and the same tiny spoonful of milk and the same glass of apple juice. So that's never changed, probably since they were a small child. So that stays the same. And if I don't have to buy any Weetabix again, I'll be floored. It'll be really strange not to have to buy Weetabix.
I think as well with my son, he's become more aware of his diet and health, and I think it depends whether they're interested or not. As growing up, my son was never interested. And then suddenly he hit kind of age 19, 20 and suddenly got massively into fitness and weightlifting. And so he started researching his diet more as to what would help him get more muscly and fit. And that's very much influenced what he eats now. And that's his choice. But it's like his specialist interest.
Gail, can I ask you, is that your child with ADHD or autism? Because the other, it's my son has been exactly like that, and he's the one that's been diagnosed with ADHD.
He has a diagnosis of autism. No one ever suggested ADHD to us, but yeah, he is diagnosed autistic. Yeah,
I think you're so right, Gail. It's like if there's an interest there, it can become a real focus, and then that can be them. They're off. They're having their protein shakes and their granola and Greek yogurt. What I'm really impressed with, because our kids are all my eldest is 18, so they're not far off each other. But it sounds like for breakfast and lunch, your kids might prepare their own food, which I'm laughing at, because my eldest won't even. She'll come in and she's able to get herself a drink, but she struggles to put the cereal in the bowl. She'll just wait until either Mark or I are there. Eldie and Molly both have OCD as well, and I think that there's a lot of things around preparing food. It's like it's always a certain bowl, always the cereal and the milk at a certain level, the spoon's got to be right. It's not something that she feels comfortable to be able to kind of prepare herself. So I'm hats off to you guys that at breakfast and lunch, you know, you can just let the kids kind of open their cupboard, or you can open the cupboards themselves and get what they need. But yeah, we're not quite there yet. And I again, it's a bit like what you've talked about, Gail. I try not to question it or to be like, no, I think you get. I've maybe though become a little bit like, if I'm in the middle of a shower and my eldest is she kind of lives. We adapted our garage because we kind of knew that university wasn't something she was going to be able to do, but we were really keen to help her with her independence. So we had a detached garage and we adapted it to a 1-bedroom apartment. So she lives out there and she loves it, absolutely loves it. And sounds very like your daughter Jenny, because she's up at 3 a.m. gaming away, and that's her in her happy place. But you know, she came in and I was literally in the shower and she was like, mom, breakfast. I was like, I'm just going to be 10 minutes. That's it. And you can manage. You can do this yourself. And she did manage. So even though 99% of the time I would be prepping all 3 meals, and I think it's just something they find really tricky, that, you know, to do. So I've never really explored it. A bit like what you were saying, Gail, it's one of those things that I just accept as what a struggle for them, and we just work with that. It's interesting the differences as well, because I think that something that my eldest had really wanted to do when she went out to the garage, she's like, I'm going to prep my own food. You know, in her head, that was where she was at. But actually, it just was a real struggle. It was just something that was a hurdle she wasn't able to get over at the moment. And can change in time, but at the moment that's kind of where she is. There's a whole host of different reasons, and I do think sensory as well, it can be quite tricky to get all the right things in the right place and doing the right stuff, and that's just a bit of a step too far for her at the moment. But yeah, I'm seeing that there might be a new world ahead while chatting to you both, that maybe they'll just go and get their own breakfasts and lunches. Who knows? It might be. The other thing, I don't know what you guys feel about this, is I was really convicted a couple of years ago with the idea of like, well, I keep saying to my husband, like leading from the front, right? So in the same way that sometimes my husband would be like, oh my goodness, the kids are in the room all day and it's all dark and they don't go out and exercise. And so we both built in exercise into our lives, because I thought, well, if we aren't doing it, how on earth would we expect anyone else to do it? And in the same way, like, we're into our chickpeas and our avocados, Jenny, just like your son, you know, we're definitely into nourishing our bodies with the right fuel. Well, to be perfectly honest, my husband just goes along with whatever I've put down in front of him, but I'm very, very into this. And like, just, you know, food is fuel and you want to put the right fuel in your body. And I always think, well, you know what, the kids are exposed to that every single day, and so that's okay. They're going to be getting that exposure, and sometimes they will be like, oh, I'll try a bit of that. They're always like, that's disgusting, don't ever give me that again. But I do think there's an element where it's kind of like, if there's exposure in the house and they're seeing that and that's available to them at all points, I think that's a really helpful thing as well, you know, without being any pressure that's what they need to adopt to. But yeah, that's what I say to my husband, lead from the front. It's one of our go-to phrases when we're struggling with something, and when he's complaining that there's too many sweets in the sweetie jar or something, and I'm like, well, I see you in that sweetie jar more often than anyone else, so I'm very into leading from the front there. And right, so I suppose moving on to thinking about information that you have read or come across or been told yourself, when I think back, probably one of the most helpful things I did was the sensory workshop, and they talked a lot about food. And one of the things they said that resonated with me completely was, they said, does your child like fast food like McDonald's? And I was like, well, absolutely. And they were like, it's because they are made exactly the same way. And so McDonald's chips and McDonald's nuggets, unless they use different oil, they are just absolutely made in the same way. And so it is completely obvious that an autistic individual might absolutely love fast food because it is the same thing. And I was like, oh, okay, right, that makes so much sense to me, this kind of the uniformity of flavor. So in the same way that Noah absolutely loves his pasta because it just tastes the same. I get the same pasta and we cook the pasta and it just tastes the same. What advice and information have you come across or been told about that's really resonated with you? Jenny, what about you? Have you come across anything that's been really helpful?
I was in a support group with other parents and just learning from them as well, and learning that I didn't know anything about the sensory issues, but and then acknowledging and learning from our children as well, that the light in the room where you're eating, and the smells in the room where you're eating, and the noise in the room where you're eating, and the feeling of the cutlery and everything is all very important, and just to gradually develop an understanding for that. So I didn't do any workshops, I'm afraid. I didn't know of any. So we've come into things on the long, hard haul, really. But the advice is, I suppose, is just to relax about it. And I do remember a health visitor saying years ago that your child actually won't starve, apparently. They're not going to starve to death, because if they're hungry, they will eat, and they will eat something. So don't worry. So I do remember hearing that right in the very beginning when they were about 4. They're not going to starve, But whether that's an old-fashioned health visitor's attitude and that has changed, I do not know. Yeah, the children will eat because we all have a need to nourish our bodies with something or other, and that sort of that instinct will kick in. But I think advice would be now just to go along with what they feel, the children want to do and how they feel about it, and just to understand and accept, and go to workshops. That obviously sounds like a good idea if you can.
I think, in fact, we were doing a podcast about getting a diagnosis as an adult, and I think one of the huge gaps is the support after diagnosis in adult and children's services, because there needs to be the workshops and the support and the what does this actually look like in your life? How do we take this diagnosis and make sure that you understand it fully, and what that kind of means for you? So I think that there's a massive gap for support after diagnosis. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I've actually done sensory workshops twice for 2 of my kids, and I have found them to be incredibly helpful, run by OTs. So if anyone's listening and has ever offered OT sensory workshop courses, I would thoroughly recommend them, because I just sat there nodding my head. Oh my goodness, that's my child. Yes, you're talking about my child, which was nice. It's lovely to be in somewhere and be like, this all this makes sense to me. And because oftentimes you are speaking to other parents who are maybe not going through the same thing and not experiencing the same as you, and it can feel quite isolating, like maybe it's you as a parent that's not done quite the right thing, which is not true. So it's lovely to be part of a group. Gail, what about you? Have you ever been given any advice or information that's just really, been something that you've been able to take and be like, oh gosh, that just makes so much sense to me?
It was probably when our son went through diagnosis. Yeah, at his assessment when he was 17, the clinician explained as well that he said, do you find that he eats more fast food or ready-made meals and stuff? I was like, yeah, he loves McDonald's. He always has the same thing, chicken nuggets and chips and a banana milkshake. I said, and he really likes these ready-made spaghetti carbonara meals that I buy from the supermarket. He said, well, it's because they're the same every time. He said, they're predictable. And when you make homemade food, it's unpredictable. And that's what he can't handle. And he said to me as well, he said, once he's made up his mind that he doesn't like it, there's no way you are going to persuade him to eat that food again. I said, yeah, I sort of realised that, but I understand now you've told me that. I said, yeah, I gave up trying to get him to eat certain vegetables a long time ago. He said, good, because he'll never eat them, now he's made up his mind. So just knowing that and understanding that, yeah, that was very helpful. It kind of all clicked into place. Other than that, I think I was the same as Jenny. I had similar advice from my health visitors. They used to say, well, just keep trying them with different things, one thing at a time, and don't worry because they won't starve themselves. They'll eat something at some point. Yeah. I don't know if they say that anymore. Who knows? I feel like But I do feel like as well, I've sort of found out more through doing my own research on the internet that has explained more about autism to me, and following, certain people on social media who are autistic and learning from them and what they've experienced and their sensory issues, it's helped me understand myself more and my children more. But like you say, there's not really a lot of help out there, especially not for adults and for late diagnosis. We got the diagnosis for Dylan, and then that was it. There was nothing else offered at all. So does need to improve, I think.
We talked about at the start that over 70% of autistic children have atypical behaviour towards food. That is going to be that a lot of people, parents who are listening, are probably nodding their head to most of the stuff we have talked about tonight. What advice would you give to those parents who are maybe just really struggling with how to support their child best who's got a restrictive diet? So Gail, what about you? What would your advice be?
I think I'd say don't worry about it. Try not to get too stressed. You're the person who knows your child best, and I think, from my point of view, and maybe Jenny will agree, without knowing that they were autistic, you just go on your own instincts as a parent, and you know what's best for your child, and you just go with that. I mean, I didn't have any professionals telling me or giving me advice on what I should and shouldn't do. I just went with my own instincts, and I think that's probably the best advice I can give. Don't give up, just keep trying them with little things, a little at a time. Don't overwhelm them with a load of new things at once, just little bits. When you're eating something, I'd often prepare meals for myself and my husband, and if we saw they were interested, we'd say, well, do you want to try a bit? And there was never any pressure, but if they wanted to try a bit, they could take a bit off our plates and taste it and see if they liked it or not. And if they did, then I'd make them some next time I made it. But I'd always have a backup plan just in case, because you never know with kids, do you? So, yeah, I'd say just go with your own instincts. I always used to think with my son, he always used to like cereal for breakfast. He would always eat a big bowl of cereal, and I thought, well, he's getting plenty of vitamins and minerals in that, if nothing else. And he always seemed perfectly happy and healthy. And I think that's all you want for your children, isn't it? For them to be happy and healthy.
I absolutely know what you mean about a backup meal, because we have always got the backup meal in place. You need it. Jenny, what about you? What advice would you give?
Just try and relax. And also, I can remember we made make it fun. Have a game, play a game. We did a lot of cooking actually when the kids were little, and that carried on, and that's made. And most families do this, but maybe if you don't, or you don't have time, just try and make time at the weekend if possible, and get that chair up against the cooker if you can, if it's not too dangerous. Obviously not every family can do this, but try and somehow, and even if they get their hands into the sauce to mix it and it's not too hot, or if that's possible with stimulation and the texture, but and I can remember actually making what I called, when the kids were little, sunshine toast, which was a piece of toast with baked beans on it, cut into a circle, and the pieces of toast around the edge, around the outside. And it wasn't beans on toast, it was sunshine toast. So, let's have sunshine toast. And then they actually agreed that they did eat mince and potatoes. So I used to make volcanoes, and they'd have volcanic eruptions with their mince and potatoes. They'd make a volcano out of potato, and the mince would be coming out over the edges. And because there was a fascination at school or whatever with volcanoes, or geography at school, so we had volcanic dinners, and then the peas would be doing something. So just make it, I don't know, and if they're eating it with their fingers, if they don't mind getting their fingers into it, just go with it. I think most families do that nowadays. I think I was probably a little bit unusual then but yeah, just have fun and relax, and it's okay. They'll have something, and I think once they get older, they'll be more willing to try different foods as they get older, and they see you, as you've been doing, Charlotte, you're cooking different foods, and the chickpeas, etc. They'll have a look and that might look okay, and so introduce different things, but do it slowly. Obviously, there's not going to be an overload, but just relax. They'll have something sometime.
Yeah, I love the idea of the volcanoes. That's brilliant. Gail, Jenny, thank you so much for joining me. It can be a really difficult place to be when your child has a restrictive diet. You can worry about nutrition and making sure that they are eating enough. You can feel a sense of frustration when you go out somewhere and your child rejects what they order, or they can't find anything to eat. You can feel a sense of failure when someone asks you why your child only eats nuggets, and you find it hard to explain. I suppose the key takeaway is that it is so common for autistic individuals to have a restricted diet. It is nothing to do with your parenting. So if you are preparing nuggets tonight for the 7th time this week, please know that you're not alone and you're doing an absolutely stellar job. Now, we would love you to get involved, so head along to the Autism Dogs Facebook and Instagram page, where a question will be put up after this episode. Share your own journey and experiences, or let us know what you think of this episode. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, bye.
Bye.